Hey everyone, I'm so happy to do this YA Science Fiction Fantasy 2021 debut panel, which is like the longest title ever for me to write down, period. I am so excited to do this panel. These are some of, 2021 feels like it's still happening. And so these are some of my absolute favorite debuts from 2021. I'm so happy that everyone agreed to do this. 2021 also was one of those years where like I was making this list about debuts and I was like, wait, was that this year? Was this book published this year? But anyway, they all were. And so I'm really excited for this panel. For basic ground rules, we are keeping this comment section super respectful and we don't tolerate any harassment or discrimination of any kind. So that's just a warning for you that if we see that behavior, then we will have to remove you. And so that's a warning. But anyway, I'm very happy for this panel. I'll just do a brief summary about who I am, and then I'll let all the lovely panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll get talking about everything debut, science fiction, fantasy, time, writing, all related. So my name's Lily. I am the book blogger person, I guess, behind Utopia State of Mind. It feels weird saying blogger because now this is like YouTube. So book person, I guess, behind Utopia State of Mind, where I review primarily sci-fi fantasy and just now everything that I can actually read at the moment. So now I will let the panelists introduce themselves because that's why we're here. So do you want to start, Kylie?
Yeah, so I'm Kylie Lee Baker. I am the author of The Keeper of Night, which is on the wrong side, which is a dark historical fantasy about a half British Reaper, half Japanese Shinigami girl who makes a dangerous deal with Japan's goddess of death. And the sequel, The Empress of Time, comes out this year. Yes, this year. We're in 2022 now. And my next series, The Scarlet Alchemist, comes out in 2023.
Okay, I am Lauren Blackwood, author of Within These Wicked Walls. It's a Ethiopian-inspired Jane Eyre retelling in which a girl named Andromeda, she gets hired to cleanse rich brat's house of the evil eye and kind of gets in over her head. So that came out in October.
And I'm June Xiao Tan. This is my debut YA fantasy, Jade Fire Gold. It's basically a Chinese high fantasy about a peasant girl who's cursed with dark magic. And if she isn't careful, she might destroy the world. So basically, to save her grandmother from a cult of evil priests, she has to team up with an exiled prince who is bent on revenge. And they embark on a road trip and things happen. And if you want to know what happens, go read it.
I'm Olivia Chada, and this is mine. There you go. Rise of the Red Hand. The first book of the duology came out last February. It's almost been a year. Oh my goodness. And Fall of the Iron Gods is coming out this summer, which is the sequel and the conclusion of the series. And Rise is a cyberpunk sci-fi story set in near future South Asia, where a street rat turned revolutionary kind of crashes together with a hacker son of a politician to take down this technocratic government that's sacrificing their very poorest to build their utopian society. Very happy. It is in the end.
Hi, I'm Claire. I'm nerdy in every conceivable way. I do LARP and cosplay and gaming, and I started writing sci-fi books. This is my debut. It came out in October, City of Shattered Light. It's about an heiress who goes on the run to save her test subject sister, but ends up crash landing on this cyberpunk planet and has to fall in with a group of smugglers to save their city from a malicious AI. I think our publisher's marketplace listing called it Guardians of the Galaxy meets Escape from New York, but queer and feminist. So that's me.
Perfect. I have read all these books, but I just get so excited hearing what they're about again. The first question I think we should start with, and also the one I think that fits the most into the debut theme, It's talk about debut journeys. So I wanted to know a little bit if people could talk me through the debut process and also what were some unexpected challenges, but also unexpected joys, because I think that I'd like to hear the positive and also the challenging. So I'm not sure who wants to start, but maybe Kylie?
If I can unmute myself. Yeah, so for me, I'm sure it's different for everyone, but I really felt like nothing was actually real until maybe 3 months or so before debut. And then it was like, here's 5 interviews for you to do every week, and you need to do your pre-order campaign, and now you're getting tagged in like 20 posts a day that you need to respond to. So it was a lot of excitement all at once, and then sort of slowly tapered off a little bit, and it's now more kind of like a plateau. So it's very exciting in a very short period of time. One thing that was really hard for me about the debut process is, I mean, people tell you, of course, to be prepared to get a lot of criticism. And I guess I'd always thought that would be more like criticism of my writing. But I'm sure like as authors of color, people know it can be more personal than that and more hurtful than that. And I think I'd heard a little bit about that, but I don't think I was quite prepared for how that was going to be once some of those reviews started coming in. But on the other hand, it's also great to hear from people, especially because my book is about a biracial character. It was really great to hear from so many biracial readers all over the world about how much my book meant to them. And so that sort of helps to cancel out some of the sadness of the other kinds of reviews. So that's kind of how it was for me.
Yeah, mine was fun. Well, it's kind of the same thing, Kylie. Like it kind of revs up like pretty close to the book coming out, and you're like bombarded with like interviews and like podcasts and stuff. And like I definitely have to write a to-do list at that time so I don't forget anything coming up. But it was pretty exciting because Within These Wicked Walls is a Reese's Book Club pick. So I found out about that actually in July, and then the book came out in October. So I couldn't say a word about it like for months. So I mean that's pretty basic for publishing, is you can't talk about stuff, but like that was like the thing for me because that's what I really wanted. And then after my book came out, like just the outpouring of love was like, as an introvert, pretty like emotional for me, and like overwhelming. But then like Britney Spears reading my book, yes. So that was pretty exciting. Yeah, and I'm with you, Kylie. Those reviews, like I sort of I don't read reviews. Like I try to block them when possible. Uh, People tag you in them anyway, but it's like, ugh, okay. So I do my best not to read them because like I know myself and I know I'm gonna be like, oh. So yeah.
Do you wanna? I think we should. Do you want to answer, Claire? I know before we went the opposite way.
You guys are muted.
No, I'm good. June was muted, and I was gonna be like, oh,
It's okay. I just
yeah, go ahead, June.
Okay, sorry. What was I saying? Oh, yeah, debut challenges. Like what Kylie and Lauren have said, like as a marginalized author or an author of color, like certain things hit differently, even if you don't think that they would. And like as they mentioned, like I mean, I don't read reviews, but sometimes you get tagged on them, and the challenge is always trying to understand that sometimes a reader is disappointed because they expected something else, and it's just like buying any product. I go on Amazon, I buy toothpaste, I don't like how it smells, I'm like, I don't like the toothpaste. So that's kind of like how I've been like trying to think of it, like once this is out in the world, it's like toothpaste or like just some other product, and it's nothing to do with me, even if some of the reviews feel extremely personal because you know they kind of like cross a certain line. But I mean, reviews are for readers. Readers can decide whether they want to read or buy a book, and the author just has to step back in order to continue to do our jobs, which is basically write the next book. Other debut challenges would just, I mean, a lot of it is just publishing stuff, which I'm sure like everybody in this panel, including you, Lily, would understand. Just, you know, things move slowly. Sometimes you don't know what's going on. Sometimes publishing doesn't know what's going on. So it's just a learning curve that I think every debut has to go through. And hopefully, like, you know, in our future books, it'll be a little smoother. At least we would be prepared. And obviously the pandemic, which I personally thought would have been okay or better by fall of 2021, which is when quite a few of our books came out. But no, it still affected everything. And as for debut joys, like as what Kylie brought up, like I think a lot of it makes up for the challenges or the not so pleasant stuff that happens to authors. Basically like just readers DMing or messaging or writing or making fan art or like playlists and saying like, oh, I really love your book, or like readers, you know, like affectionately dragging my characters. I just think it's really funny personally. Like I had a reader say that, you know, the tagline of the book shouldn't be her destiny, his revenge. It should be her destiny, he is an idiot. Which I'm like, oh my God, I love that. And they're doing it out of, you know, because they enjoyed the book and they sort of got like the story and stuff like that. So it's just like the fun and pleasant reader interactions have been like the joyful part of the whole process. Yeah. And they keep coming in, which makes me realize, if no one else has realized, is that books have a longer shelf life than we think, because what happens in publishing and YA publishing is there's a lot of pressure on debuts. So like the lead up to debut, you're like, oh my God, I have to do this, I have to do that. This is going wrong. This is not going right, you know, stuff like that. And then you realize that, hey, you know, 6 months down the road, someone's could go on Amazon, could go to the indie, could go to Barnes and Noble to see your book, and they could still pick it up. Someone is still there looking for your book and discovering your book. So, you know, that kind of like helped me calm down. And that was a lot of words, so I shall keep quiet now.
I totally agree with you, Jude. Like the idea of the shelf life is so funny because, I mean, I studied literature. I have a PhD in literature. I've read a lot of stuff. We all have, right? But I discovered books that were published like 20 years ago that still feel new. And obviously, it might be like historical now in so many ways. But I really think like this frenzy and the stress that, I mean, I don't know. I'm speaking for myself, obviously, but the stress of the debut, and I think we all had that, the anticipation, but then it's a quiet thing because we weren't in public, we didn't do anything. In the one thing that I missed so much was the return of exchange. You know, the digital world is so wonderful, but there's something you don't get that from an audience, from reading, that kind of physicality of that joy of sharing it with people in the community. And so after you debut, or at least in my case, I just slept for like a week. Literally, I was so spent and so tired. And I had just finished the second book and I was like, okay, that's it, you know. And there were so many wonderful things about it. I think my favorite thing is our debut group, because it was, I think if I didn't have that anchor, and there's so many of us doing so many different things, and it's just everyone's been kind. It's crazy that there's no person in our group who's been everyone's helpful if they can be, and that's been super nice. So if people are coming up debuting in the future, I really think find a group of people, find your debut group if you can, and lean on them, because they will lean on you too. It's just you need community. Writing is such a quiet thing, and you're mostly alone. And then when you release something, you want to share it. And yeah, I think you have to share it with, and you have to have all those secrets that you can't tell anybody about. You know, all those secrets, Lauren. You know, the ideas that like, oh, this has happened, I can't tell anyone about it for 400 years. And you're just going to slowly feel sick from that. It's really important to have that support group. So I was really happy to have that.
I had a lot of really similar experiences as to what's been recapped already. Everything feels completely surreal, and then your cover comes out, and suddenly people are paying attention to you and talking about your book, and the arcs go out, and suddenly there's parts of the internet you have to avoid. That was the case for me anyway. I had a few friends who were really great about screenshotting good reviews for me and just like summarizing stuff that people didn't like. Um, it was a little bit surprising how much stuff did ramp up closer to the publication date. I was at first convinced, like, oh my God, I have to reach out and do all these opportunities. I don't know where to find more stuff. And then suddenly people are all reaching out to me, and I'm like, oh my God, how am I going to handle all this? And it got to a point where I started needing to make a list of all the social media posts I wanted to do before release and schedule those. And it was so much. But then it kind of hit me right after release. I was like, I can still talk about this book now because it's actually out. Why did I feel like I needed to just get all of that out of the way before it even hit shelves, before people could even buy it? So it was a lot less pressure once I realized, like, yeah, you don't drop off the face of the earth once your book publishes, even though it kind of feels like publishing tells you that it does. I really loved hearing reader reactions. That was really strange to be like, for the first time, there's people I don't know who are reading my work and coming back to me and reacting to my characters and making all this like fan videos, art and stuff. That was really, it was interesting to see. It was like a mirror being held up to like what my story actually looks like. Like, what is this thing that I've spent so long inside my head? And now I'm seeing how other people actually view it. So that was surreal, and it was amazing. And I really loved hearing from readers, because the people who constantly will be commenting on your stuff and following you, they really make it worth it. It's like, this is why I do this, even if a lot of things about debut year like haven't met my expectations, or if I find myself comparing myself to other people. It's like nothing about this journey can take away all the good things so far. And it's like, this is why I dealt with all the years of rejection and querying and stuff. So a lot of highs, a lot of lows. I also was expecting to do some in-person events, which did not happen, and we'll see what the next few years look like. But so far, I think it's been great. I've learned a lot. It's exceeded my expectations in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think that it can sometimes feel also as maybe someone who's like not really necessarily just a reader, and someone who's in this weird middle ground. I agree. It can also often feel like there's so much of kind of this sort of crescendo, and then release day, and it's like the next Wednesday, it's this, the next crescendo. And I feel like that sets up such unrealistic expectations for like how the emotions should feel if it's just like working up to a point and then like you're released off of a cliff, essentially. Something that everyone was kind of talking about as well that I'm really interested is kind of has your relationship with, success, writing in general, releasing a book, reading books, changed within your debut year, and how has that changed? Yeah, basically, how is the fall from the cliff basically afterwards? Like, how has that changed how you approach, writing and sort of recouping even your writing routine, if that's changed as well as you come down from this like very high stress time of your lives?
I was empty after the release, and I had to write a book. So it was a very difficult time, and I did recoup my soul. It came back. I just had to be really patient and drink a lot of soup, and really like just enjoy things again, and start actually reading more again, and just to enjoy that. My writing changed a lot. I realized I write I write a really bad first draft. It's really bad. Like half of it is wrong. And then my second draft is where things come together. And I realized that once I realized that, I kind of can write faster, because I know I have to just push myself through that first draft, and then, yeah, continue on. And I write, yeah, it was an interesting experience to refill the well. I really recommend that. Writing with an empty well is just like I was saying online. It's like a spiritual bone, like a marrow tapping. It's like exhausting and painful, and you're just like can't do it. You don't have the words, and you lost the beauty of it. So If that feels that way, I think it will come back. Don't be afraid, it will return, but we just need to be patient with ourselves.
I think for me, it was a little bit stressful because I felt like I had so many arcs and I wasn't really reading as much for fun anymore because everything was going on social media. And I was like, oh crap, I have to talk about what I'm reading now. And I feel like I'm under pressure to be reading all these amazing books that are coming out when I feel like I have less time than I ever had. But it was other thing that I'm going to be really candid about is that it is kind of intimidating when you have a book coming out and suddenly you're like surrounded by other people who have books coming out, some of whom are doing everything better than you and are getting so much more attention than you. And it is so important to just keep your eyes on what's ahead of you and your own paper and to not compare yourself because there's a lot out of our control. And it is really important to just appreciate the people around you and all the success they have. And it's so exciting, but it is also like you're moving from being among your querying writer friends and suddenly it's like, oh God, now this is happening, this is coming out, and everything is just a whirlwind. So I think that in a lot of ways, I look back and I think like a few years ago, I would have just been like, oh wow, this is amazing that this is happening. I would have been really excited to hear what was happening. But now I feel like I've lost some of that excitement, or I am trying to remember how far I've come, and that even if there is the possibility to like compare myself to other authors, I should be proud of what I've accomplished, even though that is difficult sometimes. So yeah, debut year does change a lot as far as how I felt about my own success, but I really need to stop and reframe that once in a while.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead. No,
no, you can.
okay.
Oh, okay, she's muted now. Okay, I was just gonna say, for me, in hindsight, one thing that's interesting is just seeing how much success is really out of your control as an author. And of course, you know that logically, but at least for me, I kind of felt like, well, I want to say that I did everything I possibly could, at least for my first book, that I tried. But this year, for instance, I'm not going to go quite as hard for my a pre-order campaign. I mean, because I like doing it because it's fun, but I know it's not going to really make or break anything. And one other big change for me after having debuted is just figuring out how to be a person online, because I didn't really have I still don't have a large platform, but it's larger now than when my book deal was announced. I had like less than 100 followers on Twitter. So for a while, I had this idea that was like, I don't want to come off like a snob because, you see people talking about how, once someone gets a book deal, they act like they're too good for people who don't have agents or stuff like that. And that's not how I feel. So I never wanted to, ignore people because of who they were, if someone's sliding into my DMs. But I think it just becomes too much at one point to always worry about what people are thinking of me, if I don't respond to every single post. So I try to find a balance between, being grateful for people who are, taking nice pictures of my book and stuff, but understanding that no one should expect me to personally respond to every single post because it does become a lot at some point. So that's mostly what's changed for me after debuting.
Kind of like related to what everyone has said. I think I was actually thinking about it the other day about how success is in the eyes of the beholder a lot of times. Just like, as a debut, you may or may not feel that you have achieved certain things, but to other people, whether they're fellow debuts or authors or readers or your friends and family, when they look at what you've done, they do see that you have achieved something. So it was really strange because I think for me, because of the cliff that Lily mentioned, like after the book came out, I was just like, oh, my cat puked and pooped the next day. I still have to clean it. Like nothing, I'm still doing the same thing, nothing changes. And for a while, it was like a weird grappling thing because I think there's a lot of, it's like you've been wanting this dream for decades or years and you work so hard for it. And when it comes, you're kind of like, oh, okay, now what? So it's kind of like the adjustment period that I think like a lot of debut authors probably have to go through, or at least I definitely did. And as Kylie said, like relearning how to be a person, not only on social media, but just in real life. And I think like I mean, I'm just gonna be honest and say like I was like extremely depressed after my book came out. I'm still like crawling out of that. And I only managed to crawl out that because I realized that, oh, you know, the book, the author part is just a part of me and it's not my entire personality or my character or my person or my life. And basically it's just relearning to prioritize what's important, how to spend my time. And honestly, also hanging out with people in real life. I think the pandemic definitely affected me personally because I'm high risk and I couldn't like, see my friends in person. But when there was a lull, I definitely managed to see some friends and family, and I was like, oh, this is how it feels to be June. Oh, I forgot, So it's kind of like remembering what's important and, in a way, changing my relationship to writing, changing my relationship to publishing. I think I tweeted about this once about how like my 2020, what I've learned through debut is how I personally need to divorce publishing and being an author from who I actually am because it's a job, it's a career. So I have to like compartmentalize and separate it. So that's like my relationship definitely has changed. And with reading, it definitely has changed. I'm hoping that it'll go back, because I used to like read so much, but these days I'm having a lot of problems like reading, though it could be like related to other things, but I'm kind of like, you know, because it's, in the past, I guess for me, when I read like really good prose, I'll be like, oh my God, this is beautiful. I'm going to try to do this. Now, when I read it, I'm like, oh my God, I suck, So it's kind of like completely different mindset now, which I have to change. And I'm hoping like when I pick up a book now that it's not mine, I am going in with the mindset of a reader and not as an author analyzing everything so that I can like reclaim that joy of reading again. So yeah, those were like the things that have like my relationship to those things have changed since debut.
I agree, June. Like reading is difficult for me now. Like I used to read like all the time, like nonstop. And like since getting my book deal and my book coming out, I don't know, like reading just feels different to me now. It's very strange. Um, but also, yeah, after the book comes out, like after debut day, it gets very quiet compared to the lead up to, it coming out. So it's just like a calm and you're like, okay, what's going on? Like it feels very strange compared to like the chaos that was the lead up. So then you're like, okay, are people actually reading my book? Like, so you kind of panic a little bit and you're like, are they actually reading it? Do they like it? Like, why is it so quiet? And really, it's just quiet for you because you had all these emails coming in, you had all these interviews you had to do, and now you don't have as much to do. But like, that doesn't mean it's quiet out there for everybody else. But it's like, it gets in your head a little bit, like, ooh, do they like my book? And it also doesn't help that I totally like blocked those review sites. And like, Kylie, I get you with the DMs because I turned my DMs off because I was like, I don't want to have to deal with like all the DMs. So it's very quiet for me. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, okay, this is weird, like Twilight Zone. But like, just thinking about it's okay. It's still okay. Like, because even debut week, it was like that. And I I managed to hit the New York Times list the first week, which was amazing. But for me, it felt like very quiet and very like, what is happening? So yeah, just getting perspective, like it feels quiet for you because all those interviews are like, but for everybody else, like your book is still out there. And that's a really great accomplishment in itself.
Yeah, the reading thing, I think, deeply resonates, and specifically, I guess, something or relationship to reading. And I think deeply resonates, especially as I like reflect on 2021. But I think, yeah, when you devote so many hours and so much of your personal investment and your personal like bits of your soul, I guess, into a hobby or a writing career or whatever, it's hard to like what you're saying, June, like compartmentalize and look at like reading versus sort of reading like as a studying, I guess, if if that makes any sense. But, you know, like reading for pure pleasure or reading because you're trying to learn or get something for it or hone your craft or whatever. But so it's obviously something that I'm existentially crisising right now. But anyway, I want to talk a little bit about the science fiction fantasy genre, the SFF genre, because it is one of my favorite. That's my favorite umbrella, basically. And so I would love to know what drew everyone to specifically the science fiction fantasy genre, and what are your influences, or like, you know, your in sort of what inspired you to sort of decide that you want to write in that genre.
I can go first. So definitely anime. Grew up watching anime a lot. And I've just always been drawn to like fairies and dragons and everything since I was really little. Like anytime I'd make up a story, like in elementary school, we were supposed to make up, invent a fish and like write about it like it's a nature show. And I just turned it into a fantasy story. I misunderstood the assignment completely. So like from when I was little, just fantasy was always my thing for sure. Um, but then there's just something so romantic about it. Like even, you know, I love romance, first of all, love, but like in fantasy itself, there's just a sort of romance about it. Um, so yeah, that really draws me to writing it. And then specifically for Within These Wicked Walls, like folklore and mythology are like my rabbit hole thing. Like when I have a minute to like rabbit hole on the internet, like that's what I'm looking at: folklore, mythology. So yeah, that really inspired me for this book and like future books too.
I was really inspired. Well, my favorite movie, it's so hard to say these things, but I have to say it. Ghost in the Shell is my favorite movie of all time. The original anime version, obviously. Obviously. No, sorry. um, but it, yeah, definitely influenced by comic books is my first love. Since I could hold something, it was a comic book. And I wrote them. I hope to write them again. I really enjoy the paneling and the structure of comics, and then also anime a lot. And I think what draws, so I actually, my first version of Rise of the Red Hand was high fantasy. And that's, I tried it in there. I had this idea and had the characters, I had everything, but I put it in that world and it didn't sing because I really needed something else that was something else that I was looking for. And I'm not even sure what it was, but I kept poking around at these alternate kind of landscapes. And I think science fiction and fantasy landscapes allow you to take things that are can be really loud in this world and really strong and powerful here. And it allows you to say them even louder in a different place, full of metaphor, full of the other worlds that you're building, based maybe on history, maybe on mythology. And you can throw all these things into a blender and come out with something unique. And I think that's why I was really drawn to it. I've written contemporary too, and I will again, but I feel like there's always something weird even in my contemporary stuff. It's speculative still. So maybe I'm just a little weird, but yeah, I think there's so many opportunities in that entire space to explore the things that maybe you don't feel comfortable even saying in this world yet.
So this is probably shocking to no one who has read my work, but I was also really into anime as a kid, and that's a huge inspiration for me all the time. I was obsessed with Full Metal Alchemist as a child, and The Keeper of Night is very heavily inspired by Black Butler, and my next series, The Scarlet Alchemist, is obviously inspired by Full Metal Alchemist. So clearly I like anime a lot, and that inspires a lot of my work. People make all sorts of comparisons of my books, my book, my current book to anime. which, just on a side note there, I'm not like specific to anything that like someone here said, but other things I've said in general, like it's a little bit weird to me when people just broadly compare my work, or really any work, to all anime. Like, you know, I like it when people are like, oh, this book reminds me of this specific anime, because I love that too. But I don't like it when people are like, oh, her book is Japanese, she's Japanese, so it reminds me of anime because it has like violence. Like I don't that, because I've seen people say weird things related to that. And the other thing that influences me a lot is Junji Ito horror comics. I don't know if anyone's seen those, but just very creepy, dark, dark manga, which also shouldn't be shocking if you've seen like how gruesome my writing is. So.
I have been into sci-fi and fantasy since I was a preteen, and I started getting into video games, and suddenly it was like, oh my god, there's these other worlds that I can just immerse myself in and explore. And that was, video games were actually my gateway to books, which then kind of moved over into anime when I was in my late teens. And what I've really loved about sci-fi and fantasy is the ability to create new worlds and explore them and tweak the rules and set up scenarios and challenges for your characters that you cannot create in the real world. And it lends so many possibilities and so many conflicts and plot lines that you would not otherwise be able to make. And I just think it just creates so many more possibilities than something that's set in the real world, because you can apply current social issues, technological issues, and you can turn them into something that's a little bit bigger. And like Olivia said, it's a little bit louder when you are amplifying those into like, this is an issue we're having now. Let's see what happens when we make it the basis for a whole fantastical or science fiction speculative society. And I really love that freedom to create.
So kind of piggybacking on what Claire said, I think like the exciting and interesting thing about SFF is that it allows you a space where you can lean into hypotheticals. So kind of like what Olivia was saying about making things louder. So for example, you know, NFTs, everyone's talking about NFTs now. So maybe you have a premise about NFTs and you take it a little further in your book, you know, 20 years down the road, like what happens? So it's kind of like exploring present day social issues and kind of like whether putting them in a sci-fi world in the future or a high fantasy world where everything is like, you know, you made your own rules. I think like that this specific genre is just a place I'm comfortable in because I like to read SFF. Like I grew up reading a lot of adult literary, don't ask me why. But I really love like Philip K. Dick, and all the like, I hate to use the word classic because it always means old white men, but classic, you know, sci-fi books, because they sort of like make me think about the future and also the present and where humanity is moving. I also love Neil Gaiman because like it's the idea of how our ordinary world has little bits of magic if only you open your eyes a little wider, if only you listen a little closer. So the idea of like writing worlds like that has always been appealing to me. And I guess because as a kid, you know, like, you know, I don't want to be facetious, but as a kid, it's kind of like, oh, my life's so boring, you know, like I'm gonna think of a magical world instead where I can be like the hero or something like that. So it's that kind of idea that persisted throughout as I wrote. And then for Jade Fire Gold, it's a Chinese high fantasy, and the inspiration was definitely from the fantasy side of, I mean, sorry, the Chinese side, the East Asian side of the fantasy genre. And a lot of it is similar to the Western side too, in a sense, but it's more of like a certain trope, certain storylines, and you know the visuals and aesthetic. And that's basically, I was just inspired by a lot of wuxia movies that I watched as a kid, books that I read, you know, some of the classics of Chinese fantasy literature and so on. And that was what I felt I wanted to do for my debut. And then in future, as I move on, I hope to explore different things. And because I also love anime, so I'm feeling like, you know, that's kind of like the direction, like, you know, my future writing might go. So basically, it's just exploring interesting new worlds, I guess. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's such a level of creative sort of mastery and thought to creating these secondary world, or even just twists on our own world. I'm going to switch to some audience questions because we already have a bunch, and I don't know if actually we'll get to all of them, but the first one that I wanted to ask about is also about world building, so it's related. So it's about world building tips and ways you keep track of the number of details for consistency. So that would be probably the thing that would really like tank my book if I ever wrote one.
I think, do you mind if I jump in? The person that I've gone to over and over and over and over again for world building advice is Fonda Lee, and she's so generous. She has a class, does classes, she has so many articles, and she's such a great resource. And her books are genius. If you haven't read any of the Jade books, you should definitely do that. But one of the things I learned from one of her classes I took a few years ago was the idea that the idea that you don't have to be the Tolkien. Please don't hurt yourself writing 25 years over every little detail. And unless you want to create a conlang and all these things, that's something you enjoy, you should do that, right? But the one thing to think about was like, it's here, but what's different? What's the thing that's different? Even if it's science fiction, even if it's a secondary world fantasy, what is the thing that just shifts it? And then that one thing trickles into everything, right? It's Jade, it's the economy, it's magic, it's this thing. And then you kind of only have to worry about that one big thing. And then obviously all the other things can fall in line. But you can also have fun beyond that. But it makes it really easier to kind of keep track. Oh, my AI system is the thing that's changed, the climate, and how is this working together? And then, oh yeah, of course these things would happen. It makes it much easier. So you don't have to keep lists. It's just in your mind is how it kind of is situated. But Fonda Lee is amazing for all of the things that she says about world building.
I can just speak to how I think of world building both as a writer and a reader. I kind of second what Olivia is saying about not keeping lists. I mean, do whatever works for you, but at least as a YA writer, what I prefer to read is world building that is not super complex. So almost just for me personally, I feel like if you need a bunch of spreadsheets to keep track of it, then think about how hard it's going to be for your reader to keep track of it. But again, that's just a personal preference. Some people don't mind that. I just have trouble processing very complicated world building. I need to read things a few times for them to sink in. So, I mean, I think it's good to know the basics of like, this is how the magic system works in like 3 sentences, at least for me, so that you can make sure you're not, nothing is contradicting that as you're going through. But I try to keep things as simple as possible. And then of course it all spirals out of control as I mess it up like halfway through. But I try to at least start by trying to keep it as tight as possible. But that's just me.
I, for one, love lists. That's just a personal thing. Like writing stuff down like helps me remember things, and like making lists. I mean, really, it's a procrastination tool, really. Come on, let's be real. It helps me feel organized, but also it's like I could be writing the book right now. So yeah, lists are not necessary, but I like to do them. But mostly because like within these wicked walls, the world building is based in real life. So like the religion is real, the country is real. So like I'm taking real elements and sort of changing some things for fantasy purposes to make it my own sort of thing. So like the Deptera, that's real, that in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, part of their services, but do they need a license? I made that up. Like the way they create the amulets, I made that up. So making a list is useful for me to write down like, okay, this is the real stuff in here, but then like I usually change like most of it. So yeah, as long as you can keep track of what you're doing and keep it consistent. But then also that's what you know, when you get to copy edits and stuff, they will call you out on it anyways. So, you know, you always have a backup. You always have some help later on.
Yeah, I think that it is definitely important to keep a list of all the really important details that are going to need to be consistent throughout. Like if this is a really big thing, like this thing exists, and then the existence of it would completely invalidate another chapter, like I need to know that. But I tend not to write stuff down because I find that I write my best world building when I'm so immersed in the world that I just know everything about it. It's kind of all there at the back of my mind, like on the top of my head. And I find that it's really difficult if I have to keep consulting a list or something else. Like lists are very helpful when I'm revising, but when I'm in the drafting phase, I have the pieces that I need and I work from there. Generally, when I'm writing a first draft, the pieces of world building that I need most are pretty integral to the concept. So I'll start with that. Requiem in City of Shattered Light just came from me wanting something that was fun. Like, what's a playground my characters can play? What's the scariest place where you could be trapped with a rogue AI? And it was this high-tech city, like it's the single city on this entire moon, and it is domed in, and there's not really an easy way out. So I started there, and I was gathering other big details as I went. It was like, okay, all of my major underworld players are ladies. Can I make this matriarchal crime syndicate? How can I do that? So yeah, the whole political structure on this planet is matriarchal. So I had to come up with an explanation for that, which tied back to the history. And I had to kind of approach world building from both ends. I kind of figured out a lot of it as I went through the first draft, and then later drafts were about figuring it out. They were about filling in those gaps. They were about adding dimension to everything. And then when I would do some scientific research along the way as needed, but when I pretty much had the plot solidified, that was when I said, okay, I need to know whether this can work. How exactly does an EMP grenade work, and how would it work in this scene? So I had friends that I could talk to about that. I had an electrical engineer friend. I had a computer scientist friend. I had a neuropsychiatrist friend who I had to run these ideas by, because I think there's only so much research you can do on your own and understand how it really relates to your story. There's some point where you need to be like, all right, you're an expert. How do these pieces connect? How can I fix this? And yeah, there's a lot of ways you can go about it. But basically, I start with characters, I start with concept, make it fun, and then fill in the gaps later.
Kind of. I don't really keep a list. I think at the brainstorming stage, like the outlining or plotting stage, although I'm a bit of a pantser sometimes, as I'm writing things out and things are coming to my mind, I just type everything out. I don't necessarily refer to it. I think it's one of those, I think Lauren have mentioned earlier, like when I write things down, things stick to my head more. So I kind of do that to let it stick to my head, but I don't necessarily refer to that list or that document so much. I know like some authors do a story Bible, I think that's what it's called, where you have every single thing, like appendices. Like think about Lord of the Rings and what Tolkien did. You know, some authors do that, but it really depends on what works best for you. I think one world building tip that is, I wouldn't say similar to Fonda Lee's that Olivia mentioned, but kind of complementary, is I always try to think about world building in terms of the status and character and background of a personality of a character. So for example, if I have a scene, let's say they're in a bazaar, you know, like a market or something, and you know, you have someone who used to live in a royal palace and you have someone who's a poor peasant. How do they interact? What are they noticing if you're writing in their POVs? You know, obviously the hungry peasant's going to look at the food. You know, maybe the royal princess is going to be like, oh my god, it is so dirty. So she's noticing different things. So that kind of like helps build the world around the scene. So it's not necessarily something you can brainstorm at the start, but while you're writing the scene, I always feel like for me at least, I always try to be aware like what each character is saying, and it either gets displayed on the way that I describe, you know, the place, or the dialogue coming out from different characters' mouths. Yeah, so that's it.
I just find the concept of world building so fascinating as someone who like would spend so much time making Sims characters and drawing my own family trees and then immediately quitting and being like, I'm done for the day. I've did everything I wanted to do. That's it.
World building is like my favorite thing. If I wasn't writing, like there was so much of Jetfire Gold that's not in the book because it's YA and a certain length, and you know, readers prefer certain things. But if I ever wrote an adult SFF book, I don't know, like, do people want to read about Texas? But anyway, yeah.
Another question we got was, how does writing your second book compare to writing your first book? Easier, harder, more pressure? Question mark.
So much harder. So much harder. Yeah, I really struggled with my second one. And it's not that I didn't know what the plot was. Like, I had a synopsis right there. I was forced to write one. As a pantser, I was very offended, but I was forced to write one. And so I had the plot there, but it's, diving into a book that, I guess once you're contracted, it's a little different because you want this book to be similar, be able to be compared somehow in vibes, if that makes sense. And so you have certain parameters you need to hit for this book. It's not just like free writing, like my last one was like, yes, this is my masterpiece. And then, the other one has to match certain things in a certain way. And so those parameters made it a little more difficult to draft this one. And plus, you're on a deadline. So if you're the type of person who it took you 3 years to write that book, your first one, well, you have like a year, maybe a little more to write the second one. And so just getting into the zone and kind of forcing yourself to write, getting words down, but it was not clicking very well for me personally. Like, I'm the type of writer who, if it's not organic, then it doesn't flow well for me. And so Within These Wicked Walls did not take a year to write, but the flow was so organic that it was just working. But now, so you have this next book that has to fit certain standards, and you feel a little pressure because it's on contract. And so you kind of get in your head a little bit. So the first draft was, poo-poo. And then the second draft, I kind of, got it together and really discovered what the characters were doing. Like, because getting to know the characters for me is like the primary thing that helps me write these books well, and helps me know how the plot is going to flow. And so for the whole first draft, I did not know who the characters were. So that's kind of what made it difficult for me.
My second book almost destroyed me. It was not a fun experience. I think part of that is that it's a sequel. I know not everyone's second book is going to be a sequel, but for me, it was challenging to not tell the same story twice. So it was hard to figure out where these characters need to go without totally undoing all of the progress that they'd made in the first book, because ideally they have changed in some way in the first book. I think I drafted for like 5 months and then ended up throwing all of it out because it just didn't feel right. And then I just kept going. And by the end of it, I didn't know what writing was anymore or what English was. And I just threw it at my agent like a burning bag of garbage and was like, please tell me what I need to do. And she was like, no, actually, this is pretty good. And I was like, it is. I don't believe you. And I think part of it is also having seen so many reviews of my first book, and even there's the bad reviews that make me feel like, oh, I don't know how to write anymore. How am I going to write anything as good if people didn't even like my first book? And then I would also see good reviews that are like, wow, this was so great. I bet the second book is going to be even better. And I'm just like, is it? I don't know. I sure hope so. So there's just, I think, a lot of pressure to not just totally tank the second book and disappoint your readers. A lot of pressure that I didn't feel the first time. But it's done. And I was following June Her, who's talked about this too. She also said her second book was very hard to write, but her third book was very easy to write. And that is also what I am finding with my experience.
Yeah, my scenario was a little bit different because I did not get another book on contract with my first one. But when I had first signed with my agent and we were starting to sub City of Shattered Light, I was working on something new that I'm still only about halfway done with. And that one was kind of a nightmare for me, because what I realized was that it just felt like stage fright all the time. I felt like I wasn't allowed to mess up. My first draft had to be great, and if it wasn't, then I wouldn't be able to see potential in it, that I was on some kind of time limit. I was like, okay, my agent isn't going to like this one. What if she thinks that this first one was a fluke? What if I can't do anything great ever again? So that one was really difficult. But then after, so City of Shattered Light was acquired at like height of pandemic publishing layoffs and all that fun stuff. So the sequel has always been an option book. So when I was knee deep in the very last round of developmental edits for City of Shattered Light, I realized I am so immersed in this story, and this might be the last time that I'm so far immersed in this story. And I've been thinking about the sequel for a long time. I'm just going to write it. It's going to be for me. So I didn't really tell a lot of people I was working on it, and I just did it, and I wrote it. And it flowed more easily than any draft I'd ever done. And I was like, I love this. And so far, beta readers have been like, this is better than your first book. So it is being pitched very soon, so we'll see how it goes. But I found it was like an epiphany for me, because that other book was just like pulling teeth trying to get the words out, and this one was like, it was just going to be for me as far as I knew. And it kind of helped me rediscover why I started writing and why I wanted to write, and it was great. So I'm hoping I can start to channel more of that in future books, but it is really difficult in this industry when there's that pressure, I think.
Oh yeah, book 2. Kylie, I had the same experience. There were flames around me. I was like, what is word? What are things? Please read this. And then I rewrote the whole thing. It's just, it was hard because we were empty at that point. I had my duology, so I had to write the second book, and I wanted to, and I thought I knew what it was, and I had like a 20-page synopsis. So I thought I had it, but then I realized I feel worse about knowing where I'm going when I know where I'm going. I feel like I need to get the sense of where the characters are going. So because I knew where everything was, I knew what was behind every door. It was boring to me as a writer, so I wrote a really boring thing, and then I had to just scrap that and start over. But this other book I'm writing now, which is book 3, it's not in that series. It has nothing to do with anything, and it's Claire. It's totally for me, and it feels so good. It's flowing, and it's beautiful, and it's mine, and no one gets to see it until I'm ready to show it. And it's just feels so nice to be there again. I think there's a big difference when you're contracted and things are tight and timelines, and oh my goodness, and then you're empty, and then pandemic year has sucked the life out of your world. And so yeah, hopefully future books flow much easier as well for all of us.
Just quickly, I don't have a book on contract, and I'm not writing a sequel. Sorry, guys. So I am working on a different project, and in a way, I guess it feels like book 2, because you're kind of writing when you're trying to promote the first book, and you're writing when you get tagged in reviews that say nice or not nice things. So it affects how you write. So right now I'm still working on it. I'm shutting myself up. It has been very difficult, but I think I'm starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Mainly because my agent is like, it will be ready when it's ready. Like, there's no pressure. Take all of the time. You have the luxury of time because you're not on contract. So I'm trying to enjoy like the process. Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, so we're almost done. We have a small question for Kylie, and then I have a follow-up question for everyone. We wanted to know if there was sheet music on your music stand, and if it is, what sheet music it is. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. Yes, I do. It's sheet music. I think what you're looking at now is just different scales. I have a cello here that I haven't taken out in quite a while. So that's what the sheet music is for.
And then my follow-up question for everyone, as our sort of, last question, is since we are talking about a panel of 2021 debuts, and I wanted to know if anyone had any 2022 SFF debuts that they wanted to shout about, to put on our radars. Yeah.
Cold the Night Past the Wolves is so good. That one just came out. Meg is amazing. So yeah, definitely that one. Bone Spindle is still on my TBR. It looks great. Mindwalker by Kate Dillon comes out this fall. It is amazing. She doesn't have a cover yet, but you guys should keep it on your radar if you like cyberpunk.
And also Beasts of Ruin by Ayanna Gray. So the sequel to Beasts of Prey that came out this past fall. It's gonna be lit.
Yeah, I have a whole list, but these are debuts. So, Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Su Lin Tan, it just came out. Violet Made of Thorns by Gina Chen. If you like The Cruel Prince, you probably would like that. The Ivory Key by Akshaya Raman. It's a South Asian fantasy, focuses on sibling relationships, and it's great. Monsters Born and Made by Tanvi Burwa. Yeah, I hope I'm saying it. Sorry, Tanvi Burwa. And I think that's coming out later this year. Who else? I forgot. A Magic Steeped in Poison by Judy Lin. It's the one with the beautiful, beautiful cover. I think it's coming out in March, and the sequel is actually coming out in the same year. So, you don't have to wait that long. You can read both in the same year. And Only a Monster by Vanessa Len. Also a debut coming out in February. I really, really enjoyed. I got an ARC. I really enjoyed reading that
Oh my god, you got an ARC. I'm so jealous. She put me on the
Yeah.
list, and our publisher was just like, no, not important enough.
Sometimes I feel like one thing I felt like before I became a published author, I thought, oh, authors get all these free books. But no, you don't. You kind of have to back for them, but buy them, and yeah, you don't get free books.
I have a
At least I
couple to
don't.
add to your list. Everyone has already said every book that I'm super excited for, but also Mike Chen's Light Years Away is going to be it's an adult novel. He's just wholesome and also science fiction and awesome. Sunny G's Series of Rash Decisions by Navdeep Dhillon. And Sylvia Liu's Hana Su and the Ghost Crab Nation. It's a middle grade.
Yes,
It's so amazing. I'm reading the ARC right now and I love it. So that's coming out in June. But yeah, Bone Spindle, Cold the Night, Fast the Wolves are just killer right now. So I'm reading like too many books right now, like a line at a time. It's just very disorienting, but awesome.
I would like to add Deep in Providence by Rhys M. Nielsen. That was one of my favorite books that I read last year. That one was very good. Also The Red Palace by Junher, because I love Junher, and Brave by Elisa Bonin. So that's what I'm looking. Oh yeah, there you go.
Not a debut, but a Red Palace. Like, Junher writes Korean historical mysteries.
Oh wait, were we only supposed to name debuts? Sorry.
Well, it doesn't matter. Yeah, but
yeah, she's not a debut.
Yeah.
I forgot. Sorry, I got too excited about Junher. Can't help it.
Wait, Claire, can you just say the second title again? I was not typing fast enough. I wanted to drop it in the comments so everyone.
Mindwalker was another one.
Perfect.
Yeah, definitely seconding Sunny G, and oh my god, you guys mentioned all the other ones I'm excited for. There's so many good ones.
Yeah, I had also a list, but I don't have any anymore on the list, so I don't know what else to say. This was such a great panel. I'm sorry we didn't have a chance to get to all the questions. There's so many questions, so little time. But I'm so happy that everyone was able to attend, to ask questions, and also so grateful to all the panelists for joining and spending some time with us to talk about debuts and world building and publishing in general. Yeah, I hope everyone has a really great day. And yeah, thank you all for being here on this day in January.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.